Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running, State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week we have a great conversation with Chris Lundstrom, coach of the professional running team at Minnesota Distance Elite, which means he's the person who guided Dakotah Lindwurm to her third-place finish in the U.S. Marathon Trials in February. Chris is headed over to Paris soon to oversee Dakotah's final preparations for the Women's Olympic Marathon, which will be held on August 11th.
Chris grew up in Minnesota, attended Stanford, and then earned a PhD in exercise physiology. He's now a professor at the University of Minnesota, where he teaches an undergraduate marathon training course for college kids who are interested in trying the 26.2-mile distance. I sure wish that I could have taken such a course back in the day.
We all needed it back in the day.
We did, Amby. But before speaking with Chris, Amby and I want to review some of the biggest running recent news. There have been lots of stories about the new spray-on running shoes from On, the Swiss company, that Hellen Obiri will be wearing in Paris. Some marathon fans are worried that this could give Obiri the kind of head start that Nike runners enjoyed in the 2016 Rio Olympics, when they were then the only ones who had the brand new super shoes to wear. Amby, I understand you've been studying the question. What do you think?
George, to be honest, I haven't seen the shoes. I haven't held them. I haven't worn a pair. So I've been mainly mulling it over in my head and thinking about shoe performance. And here's my conclusion. I think these shoes are mainly a manufacturing breakthrough. They're basically 3D printed shoes so that they'll fit perfectly on Obiri's feet. For example, there are no shoelaces at all. But running shoes only get faster when they have new materials under the foot in the midsole, materials like superfoams and various plates. And On hasn't said anything about that. And also, this is very important. World Athletics now maintains a database of legal shoes. That did not exist in 2016. The On shoes are listed as legal on this database, so World Athletics has seen them and approved them for competition in the Olympics. I was one of those who was really unhappy about the Nike shoes in 2016. I really think that was a case of shoe doping, for lack of a better term. But these On shoes, I think they're fancy, but they're perfectly okay with me. And then I'm wondering, George, we're going to be seeing an Olympic men's marathon very soon in Paris. Do you think there's a certain individual who's got a chance for a third consecutive Olympic gold medal in the marathon, which of course has never been done?
So before we get to Eliud Kipchoge, and it's a great question, Amby, let's just throw out a big cheer for two of our recent podcast interviews with Connor Mance and Clayton Young, the two guys from Utah who were first and second in the trials, and they were just such great young men and role models and good faces for the sport that you just can only hope that they do well, and maybe one of them pulls a Molly Seidel and an upset and gets onto the podium. And the same for the three American women. Of course, we'll be talking, with Dakotah's coach today. I'm always rooting for those Americans. It's great for U.S. distance running. But your question, of course, is about the GOAT, the greatest marathoner of all time, Eliud Kipchoge. And Amby, I think it's fair to say that, even Eliud sooner or later can't escape the simple fact that we get older, and when we do, things begin to slow down for runners or give up for other athletes, and I think we're in that phase now. Ellie has run 3 recent marathons, one in Boston that you and I know didn't go well. It was a 6th place finish. I think it was 2:09. It was not his type of a course, which has always been that super fast Berlin style course. Then he did come back and he ran very well and won Berlin, and it kind of got the heart fluttering again that maybe, just maybe, he could do this and be the first ever, as you suggested, to win 3 Olympic marathons. But Tokyo didn't serve him awfully well, and that was not a great performance. It was in the high 206s, and he was back in the pack. Let's just put it this way. He'll be an emotional favorite of countless running fans. A betting favorite, not so much. Definitely not. So what do you think, Amby?
Well, I'm going to quickly note that when you said Tokyo didn't serve him so well, you were talking about Tokyo in February of this year, where he was 9th or 10th, because of course the Tokyo Olympics was his 2nd straight, and Paris, who knows? I am 100% rooting for Elliott, but I'm only giving him about a 10% chance of winning for all the reasons that you just enumerated. I have been wrong about Elliott before, and I hope I am this time. If he could win in Paris, we would end forever the GOAT, the greatest of all time debate, and just give him the crown. And that would be great. And so that's the biggest recent running news from Running, State of the Sport. Now let's turn to Chris Lundstrom, this week's guest on the Running State of the Sport podcast. Chris is an exercise science professor at the University of Minnesota, a former 2:17 marathoner himself, and coach of the Twin Cities professional team named Minnesota Distance Elite. That means he's coached to U.S. marathon runner Dakotah Lindwurm, who will be running the Olympic marathon in Paris on August 11th. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Chris, let's get started with some just basic questions about you for our listeners. A little bit of your bio, your age, where you grew up, where you're living now, your family situation, and, what do you do to fill in your hours when you're not running and coaching?
Yeah, I grew up in Northfield, Minnesota. It's a small town about 45 minutes south of the Twin Cities, home of Carleton and St. Olaf colleges, which is sometimes the only reason people have heard of it. But currently live in Minneapolis with my wife and 2 kids. My son is 9 and my daughter is 12. So they keep me pretty busy. If you want to know about how I fill my time, I'm trying to keep up with them for sure. Other things, I get into a little bit of rock climbing here and there, and continue to run some, not competitively, but just trying to stay in shape. But that's kind of the basics on me.
Well, Chris, our listeners can't see you. We can, and you look like your BMI is hovering around 20.5. So you're still keeping pretty fit somehow. I'm wondering if you could tell us how you got started in running when you were a kid, as opposed to ice fishing in Minnesota, and what kept you going? What kept you motivated in the sport when you were young?
Yeah, like a lot of kids, I did a variety of sports, including your summer track programs and things like that. So I had some background in running, but I would say when I really got into running was going out for cross country as an 8th grader. which I did because I had a friend on the team and wanted to get in shape for basketball. But really, that decision had such a profound impact on my life that I couldn't have known at the time. But just being a part of what was really an amazing high school program. My coach, Pat Foley, is somebody who I still consider a friend and mentor. And it was really um, pretty immediate that I loved being a part of running. And I actually remember the end of that cross country season watching the New York City Marathon live on ABC Sports and just thinking, wow, that's so cool and amazing, and wanting to do that someday. So I set my goal of running all winter. I was going to run every day all winter. And I think I made it about 2 weeks. And then, as you can imagine, it did get very cold in Minnesota, and my will was broken. But I was kind of hooked. And so definitely got very into running as a high schooler. Went on to compete in college at Stanford University, where I was a very mediocre college runner. Um, but we had great teams. So I actually finished up there and felt like I probably was, done as a competitive runner. But then I saw a couple of my former teammates make the Olympic team in 2000, and that lit a fire back under me a little bit to see what I could do. And so shortly after that, Team USA Minnesota was formed, which is the team that I currently coach. That was our original name. So I was moving up in distance, had already run the half marathon, and ran my first marathon about the same time I joined Team USA Minnesota in 2001. I ran Grandma's Marathon there. And then that fall, I got the chance to run the New York City Marathon, which was the host of the U.S. Championships that year. Also, 2001, in the aftermath of 9/11, just a historic, incredible event that they were actually able to pull it off that year. And I was third in the U.S. Championships there in the marathon. So that was kind of my hook into the marathon, knowing that was where it was at for me. So continued to train and compete in the marathon for many years after that.
So, Chris, you described yourself as having been a mediocre runner at college, but yet you eventually went on to run 105 and a half, I believe, and 217, I think, in the marathon in the early 2000s. Was that your top end? And did you have any Olympic trials or other performances that you were particularly proud of?
Yeah, I think I was I wasn't being uh, falsely modest when I say I was mediocre. I didn't make our varsity team at Stanford. We were a very good team for sure. We won NCAA cross a couple of years, but I think I just thrived on the longer distances. So I did eventually, after college, I think I ran 29:05 or something like that for 10K. And low
Mm-hmm.
14s for 5K, which is not bad, but it's not going to even then make big waves on the track. So I think I just really thrived at the longer distances and training higher volume and those longer races. But I mean, I did run that 217 on the Twin Cities Marathon course, so equivalent. Maybe it could have gone a little faster in a Chicago or someplace like that, but I definitely gave it a lot of tries. So I feel pretty good about how well I explored my upper limits for sure.
Chris, at some point you got a PhD in kinesiology, exercise science. I'm curious, A, what was your thesis about, just because I'm curious? And B, since you're a scientist, tell me what's the difference between you and some of your contemporaries, like, say, a Meb Keflezighi or an Alan Culpepper?
Yeah. I went to get my PhD. I started in 2011, I was nearing the end of my, um, I guess, professional running career, and knew that I uh, uh, kind of wanted to learn more about the science of running. So my thesis, my PhD really was about running performance. In our department, we have basically a 3-paper model. So your dissertation is composed of 3 different papers essentially. But kind of the unifying theme for me was running performance, running economy, and my main study was on plyometric and explosive speed training for marathon runners, which obviously we knew for like 800-meter runners, 1500-meter runners, and sprinters, that's a huge area that they focus on in their training, but not as much explored for the longer distance runners. So that was what I focused on. And I guess if you want to know what's the difference between me and Meb and Alan, I would get, I tested my VO2 max a number of times. It's good. I haven't tested those guys, but I bet it's markedly different for sure. Just another, 10 to 15% that, in the marathon, it equalizes out a little bit. It's more about your efficiency and economy. But in a 5K, 10K, how much oxygen you can utilize and burn through to deliver energy is going to be the defining factor for most people. So that's probably the big difference. And I actually, Meb was at UCLA while I was at Stanford, and so I have a picture from college. It's probably from about the 1 mile mark, but it's a bunch of Stanford guys abreast with Meb, including me. So I can act like I was competing with him in college, but he was on another level. And it's fun now. Both Annie and Dakotah are
the 1
are
mile mark of
yeah. Both Annie and Dakotah are represented by Howie Management, and Howie, of course, is Meb's brother. So it's fun to reminisce about those times.
So that was the 1 mile mark. You were still with him, and what was that race? A 5K, a 10K?
I think it was a cross country race, so probably an 8K, I would guess. Yeah.
Oh, in cross country. Got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yes. Good. So, Chris, let me ask you, is it true that you've taught or maybe are still teaching a beginner's marathon course at the University of Minnesota? And what principles do you stress to these student runners? What advice do you give them that we and our listeners might find surprising and useful?
Yeah, I do. I do teach a marathon training class at the University of Minnesota. We started it, I think it's now over 15 years ago, and it's been going. We do it every spring. Uh, and it's really like kind of your introductory marathon group that you might have with, as a part of one of your groups that's training for one of the big city marathons. So it's stressing a lot of the basic stuff of injury prevention, nutrition, hydration, all of those types of things. With college students, a lot of it is trying to emphasize as much as possible the importance of sleep and recovery and nutrition. And just really, I guess there's nothing particularly surprising that I would say that's controversial or anything like that. It's really, for many of them, it's the first time training for a longer event. So it's a lot of it is the mental side of believing in yourself that this is something that's possible for you. And it's amazing to go from the first couple of weeks where we do an 8 mile run, for example, and afterwards I ask them to raise their hands if that was the longest run they've ever done. And usually over 50%, it's the longest they've ever gone. And to continue to do that later in the semester when now we're going 18 or 20. And so seeing that process and just being able to believe in themselves that they're going to be able to get through that 26 miles, it's really fulfilling to be a part of that.
Chris, could you tell us a little bit more about the elite running group, Minnesota Distance Elite? You guys don't get the publicity of some of the coastal teams or the high altitude teams from Boulder and Flagstaff. You're in the cold, flat Midwest. Does it bother you that you're overlooked a little bit? you don't seem to have a big shoe sponsor. You don't have somebody tweeting every day, I don't think. Tell us about the team, and would you like to see it get bigger and better known?
Yeah, we've been around since 2001 as Team USA Minnesota originally. We changed our name a few years ago. We have currently 15 athletes, which is the largest that we've been, I believe. And we are continuing to grow. We're going to be adding a number of athletes in the upcoming couple of months. So I am excited for that. I do want to see it grow while not becoming massive either. I don't want us to be so big that I'm not able to provide the individual attention that I like to provide as a coach. In terms of being overlooked, I don't really mind that. I think we certainly are always looking for additional sponsors and things like that. We've talked with some shoe companies, but we also don't want to give up our athletes freedom to choose their own sponsors. And we're essentially a nonprofit that's set up to support post-collegiate runners. So we want to do that as best as we can. We do have a little bit of an underdog mentality, perhaps, and that's okay. I think that gives us a little bit of an edge. I think we're ideally located here in the Twin Cities because we have access to all the weather conditions that one could possibly encounter on planet Earth. So we're ready for anything. But I do think our profile has obviously come up a little bit with Dakotah's success, and that's a great thing that we're happy about, and I hope to see it continue to rise. But if we're not the first group that people think of or the first location people think of when it comes to elite training, that's okay with me too. The people we have here, I know they want to be here and they're committed and there's some great athletes, and I think we got some big things in the years ahead.
So, Chris, you just mentioned Dakotah's success, and of course, that's Dakotah Lindwurm, and she finished third in the Olympic marathon trials, and now she's headed to Paris, and I know you'll be going there with her as your coach. And let's talk a little about Dakotah. First of all, it's a great name, and do you have any nicknames for her? And also, tell us a little bit about what your expectations had been for Dakotah going into the trials. Did you see her making the team at that point? And what are you looking for from her in Paris?
Yeah, I don't have any nicknames. I can't do that for you. I know Annie calls her D-Dog, which I think is really funny. Actually, our former coach, Dennis Barker, we used to call him D-Dog. So there's a little continuity there. Um, but yeah, I guess in terms of what we were expecting going into the trials, we had 7 athletes competing. So I really try hard not to spend a lot of my energy predicting who's going to finish where and trying to mentally control things that are out of my control. That just kind of drives you crazy as a coach. But just in some conversations within our team's board and support system, I think there was a belief that we could have an Olympian. I believed we could have 3, honestly. Both Dakotah and Annie on the women's side and Joel Reichow, I felt, had a shot on the men's side. And I thought, if 3 of them are in the top 10, I got to say that would still be a darn good day. But, again, you're trying to let it go a little bit and just allow the day to transpire and be out there and support them as best as you can. So I wouldn't say it was a surprise that she made the team. I thought it was. I did feel like we were overlooked, certainly going in. To kind of go back to your last question, there wasn't a lot of talk about Annie and Dakotah and Joel, which was surprising to me given some of the performances they had already. But you don't expect a marathon, a person to make the Olympic team. That's just it's just there's too many factors that are outside of your control to feel like, oh yeah, it's definitely going to happen. But I certainly was not shocked, but it certainly did feel amazing to have it all come together for her. And yeah, as far as Paris goes, Dakotah is heading over. She wants to be there for the opening ceremonies, so she's going to be there fairly soon. I am going the week of the race, so I'll be there for a few days in advance of the race. I think it's going to be a very unpredictable race in terms of how it'll um, uh, kind of transpire, just because of the nature of the course. It's pretty flat for 10 miles, but then you've got really some mammoth hills, uh, generally uphill on the way out to Versailles, and then generally downhill, but a big climb as well on the way back towards Paris. And that's the middle 10 miles of the course. And then it's really bombs down this downhill, and then you've got 10K to go after that. That's pretty flat. So where people decide to make moves is going to be interesting to see. And of course, anytime it's championship style racing, it's unpredictable. Add to that the kind of pressure cooker of the Olympics and the expectations of the world on different people. It's just it's this is why we love sports. It's we don't know what's going to happen, so I'm excited to see how it all goes. But I do think, Dakotah's training has been going well, and she's going to be ready to give her best effort on the day, and we'll see where that puts her.
So, Chris, if you had three athletes who might have made the team in February at the trials, tell us about the training approach, the training philosophy, the key workouts or principles that you employ with these athletes. And following up on that, what is it exactly that makes Dakotah so apparently outstanding at the marathon?
Yeah, we do a mix of different um, training training zones and types of workouts throughout marathon training. We don't get too far away from the track. We still do some faster stuff, but really the bread and butter is the marathon pace workouts and the longer threshold workouts. So obviously the long run is very important, and oftentimes we will be building in a good amount of time at what we expect to be marathon pace or marathon effort. And so really that's where Dakotah excels in the shorter stuff. Um, Annie and even others on our team sometimes might be faster, but when it comes to workouts that are 60 minutes or longer, 60, 90 minutes, and the long runs, Dakotah really just doesn't tire and doesn't hit the wall in the same way that most people do. Most of us mere mortals do. So that's really her strength. Is just the longer it gets, the stronger she is.
You mentioned she's going to go to the opening ceremony, and who can blame her? It's a once in a life, and particularly the one they're orchestrating for Paris. Literally on the Seine River as an opening ceremony, not in the stadium. But that's a couple of weeks before her marathon. So is she going to stay in Europe? And what's her plan between the opening ceremony so she doesn't, get overhyped and caught up in all the Olympic Village excitement and all of that? What is she going to be doing?
Yeah, we've talked about that. She decided her boyfriend is going over with her, and they've got an Airbnb. So for the most of the time, she's not going to be staying in the Olympic Village, which I think is important. It's a great experience, obviously, but as various athletes finish their competition and are celebrating, you don't necessarily want to be in that spot when you are still 10 days out from your competition. So I think it's going to be, she's got a fairly quiet spot that she can retreat to. The U.S. team has the high performance center over there for training purposes. So we are well taken care of there, and we'll be able to get what we need in terms of places to work out. But really, this is the final couple of weeks going into the marathon. It's the emphasis is on rest and recovery more so. Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's an important balance to strike between really enjoying this really special experience and also not compromising your preparation for race day. And I think Dakotah's got a really um, great head on her shoulders to manage that.
Chris, since you're a PhD in exercise science, I get to geek out with you over the whole, seems like a tidal wave of new things that have flooded into the sport in recent years. We've got super shoes, you've got hydrogels, you got super high carb gels to take during a race, sodium bicarbonate beats, cooling and recovery techniques. A person can overdo this stuff, I would think. What do you think is actually useful among some of these techniques, and what do you try to avoid so you're not micromanaging everything?
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about the marathon is, aside from the shoes, much of this doesn't apply. The um, bicarbonate, that type of stuff, that's not going to help anybody in a marathon. I think the gels certainly increasing carbohydrate intake to the extent that's tolerated by the gut is important, but there's a limiting factor there, which is just you can only absorb so much. And I think part of the progress of the sport we've seen for sure is that, back in the 90s or 80s, people won these big marathons just based on their pure running ability, and they kind of didn't pay a whole lot of attention to hydration even and nutrition throughout the race. And so obviously as the sport gets to a higher and higher level, uh, taking care of those little things has become important. Um, but I do agree that you can overdo it and focus too much on those, minor percentages and not take care of the big thing, which is being able to run a long ways at a fast pace, which there's no shortcut around that. um,
Damn it.
so I know it's unfortunate, but unfortunately we still got to do the running. So
Run a long way at a fast pace, exactly. This week there's been a big shoe story on spray-on shoes from On, as you know, and apparently Helen O'Beary is going to be running in them in Paris. And what are your thoughts? Are you concerned that this is the equivalent maybe to the Nike super shoes that first came out before the Rio Olympics? And what effect might all this have?
yeah, I haven't seen the shoes myself or any data on their efficacy. I am more concerned about Helen O'Beary as a physiological phenomenon than about what's on her feet. She's already incredibly gifted athlete, and I think sometimes I do see, whether it's some of the running websites or whatever else, over indexing on the effect of the shoe technology. Um, comparing, well, this group is in this, brand of shoes compared to this one. And I think the bigger effect is still how good your training is and your physiological resiliency. That being said, I mean, obviously the Nike shoes were a game changer back in 2016, and I would hate to see a case where once again the unfair advantage is given by somebody having access to um, a superior piece of technology that's not accessible to the general population.
So Chris, we were just talking about my geeked out science interest. One thing we didn't mention that you would, I think, agree with is that staying cool in the marathon is a good idea to the extent you can do it. Paris hasn't had the heat wave this summer so far that it had last year. But what will Dakotah do to keep as cool as she can during the marathon? And is she going to
Mhm.
pick up on the Clayton Young water bottle and frozen caps?
Yeah, fortunately, we've had a really nice wave of swampy heat and humidity here in the Midwest. So she is prepared for that. And Dakotah is a really good heat runner anyway. But she's also saunaing, I think, almost every day. So she's prepared. I think anything you can do out on the course is kind of a bonus. I think we should be able to get her some ice towels and that type of thing, particularly if it does heat up excessively. But that is sort of a transient effect, in my opinion. I mean, certainly you want to get them cold water. And I think compared to a major marathon, this is where an Olympic type setup has the advantage, where the actual U.S. team coaches can manage their fluids and make sure that water is really cold versus picking something up off a table that's going to be risen up to the ambient temperature. So we'll certainly make sure that she's getting cool beverages and ice towels if needed. But the bigger thing is the preparation. We're not going to high elevation. That's a decision we made. But as you know, along with high elevation usually comes relatively cool and very low humidity environments. So we opted to stay with sea level and higher humidity and heat conditions for her training. So she's ready to go on that front.
So, Chris, our podcast is called Running, State of the Sport. So we ask everyone who comes on with us about their thoughts on the state of the sport. Where do you think the sport is doing well, and where could it use improvement?
I think the sport has great grassroots energy around it. People love running. I think running is continuing to grow. I think we continue to have a challenge in connecting the average runner with the professional side of the sport. I think this is where an event like the Olympics is such a great opportunity. We've really seen it just in our community with the amount of everyday runners in our community who are so excited for Dakotah and coming out to, we had a send-off event for her. So many people came out to voice their support. And so I think we need to seize opportunities wherever we can to connect the high end of the sport with that grassroots average runner out there who's just discovering it and enjoying feeling a little bit better throughout their day.
So our last question, Chris, is the fairy godmother question. We give you 3 fairy godmother wishes, and only 3, and you can make them for Dakotah, for all the other marathoners, for Eliud Kipchoge, if you'd like him to win 3 in a row, for the fall marathon season. What would be your 3 fairy godmother wishes for the next coming period?
Yeah, this is a great one and tough to narrow down. I have so many wishes. I think I would say one of my it harkens back a little bit to what I was just talking about, but one of my wishes would be for more resources and energy in our sport to go into development. I've seen, the way that athletes are supported in our sport really is you get to the highest level and then everybody's ready to provide you some support versus, what you really need, which is you're coming out of college and athletes coming out of college, maybe they have a big amount of debt. There's a lot of pressure to, figure out how they're going to pay for rent. That's when they need some support, and it doesn't need to be a huge amount. But obviously, that's what we're trying to do with Minnesota Distance Elite, is to bridge that gap. But I think we're doing a better job in the sport of finding some options like that. But I think the more we can support the development of post-collegiate athletes, the better and the stronger we're going to be as a nation in the distance running sphere. Because as you guys know, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes years and years of hard work. So that would be one, just more support for development. I think another one would be that that we continue to, as the sport grows, that we continue to hold on to its basic roots of being a a sport that's accessible to everybody and is inclusive of everybody. I mean, for me, as I started out, that was the really cool thing is all I needed to do was strap on a pair of shoes, and I had baggy sweatpants and a sweatshirt. There were no technical fabrics involved here, but it was something that I could do. And obviously, I love my tech gear and all of the innovations and things that we've been talking about. But I think at root, it's a simple sport, and the more that we can continue to encourage a broad swath of the population to embrace it, the stronger our sport is going to be, the healthier our population is going to be, and I think that the happier as well. So I'm a big advocate for people just getting out and moving, and running's a great way to do that. My third one, I guess, if I get, boy, it's tough to pick a final one. But I would say I would just wish everybody would connect with somebody out there who they think is maybe a lot different from them, and go out for a run or a walk, whatever it is. I think our world would be a better place if we just spent a little time moving together and understanding that we've got so much in common with our fellow humans.
Nice.
Chris, those are all terrific. And we certainly wish for the same. The last one was a novel response from you, verging almost into the political arena, which is just fine. And I think it's a great idea. So that wraps things up for our conversation with Chris Lundstrom, coach of Olympic marathon runner Dakotah Lindwurm. Dakotah Lindwurm. I knew I was going to confuse those two at some point. I hate the fact that Lindwurm is coached by Lundstrom. I want one of you to change your name. Maybe Dakotah will get married and change her name. Chris Lundstrom, Chris Lundstrom, Dakotah Lindwurm, and the Minnesota Distance Elite. Chris, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sorry I just flubbed up on your name.
Chris, it was a great pleasure getting to know you and spending some time.
It was really great to be here. I thank you guys so much for the conversation.
Amby, that was a really informative conversation for us with Chris Lundstrom. Since we didn't know him well beforehand, and most listeners won't have known him much either, what really struck you about what he told us?
First, I guess, it was terrific to get to know more about Chris, because he's obviously a wonderful, powerful force to have involved in this national renaissance of running and marathoning in this country. I enjoyed his personal running story. He told us that at Stanford, although he was having a good time running, he couldn't even make the varsity because those Stanford teams, they were pretty powerful. But he stuck with it, and he got down to 2:17 in the marathon himself, and that's a pretty big deal. We all want to hear those stories about how persistence pays off, and it's certainly true in Chris's case, and also the case of Dakotah Lindwurm, who went from 36th in the marathon trials of 2020 to 3rd this year. That's some kind of persistence and improvement. I also like that he and Dakotah decided to stay home in the Twin Cities to prepare for a possibly hot and certainly very hilly Olympic marathon. I have a friend who lives out in the Twin Cities, and she's been complaining nonstop this summer about the hot, swampy weather. That's no fun to train in, but it really is a perfect place to get yourself acclimated to the heat and humidity, which might be a part of Paris or might not. But you've always got to be ready for it. So I thought those two were pretty good. George, what reactions did you have to our chat with Chris?
Yeah, I was kind of hearing echoes of our previous guest, Ed Eyestone, a little bit as we talked to Chris. There's a sense they both have. It's a no-nonsense, no shortcuts approach to training that came through, and it's about the training, and it's a mix of long runs, tempo runs, and track workouts, of course, to get some speed work in. And that's a strong theme that we get from a lot of the top coaches. They don't believe in one secret workout or pace. And they believe that a mix of workouts and paces, of course, are what gets you there. The secret to the sauce, of course, is the way you mix the ingredients together. And you get a real sense from Chris that you mix them differently for each runner. They've got to be customized. That was where I came out. I got a feeling he's a very, very solid coach, and it's going to be fun to watch Dakotah in Paris.
You know, George, I'm glad you made that comparison with Ed Eyestone, because I had the same feeling exactly without quite putting it all together in my head. And building on that, I think when you've got really senior coaches like Ed, because he's been around, and Chris not so long, but has learned a lot in his time, these guys serve as mentors to other possible coaches who are really the future of coaching and training and marathon running in this country. So you start with one, you've got two, you've got four, you've got 8, you've got 16. I think these guys are hopefully leading a real multiplier effect. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving. Onward.